Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Tools for Living and Parenting series. It's my covet and honor and delight to have on Rabbi Dr. Benzion Twerski. Our friendship goes back a very long time. We were involved in Teens at Risk. Are we dating ourselves, Dr. Twerski?
We know each other before that.
Yes, of course. Mishpacha. Right. But for those who don't know, Dr. Twerski is an incredible therapist working with families, addiction, and teens at risk, and all of it. What you might not know is Dr. Twerski was kind enough to mentor me when I started dealing with teens at risk in 1996, and we started Project Yes. And I don't have any clinical background. I've never done therapy with anyone. I know my lane and I stay in it, but there was so many things that I needed to know, and Rabbi Benzion has made himself available to me personally, to anyone else, to speak at conferences and to join task forces and groups. Really, it's a comfort to have you, Rabbi Benzion, and Hashem should give you mazel and bracha in all your work and nachas from your family. We're talking about the new normal, family life after Corona, and Dr. Twerski's work with families, brings him into contact up close and personal, dealing with family stress. Now we all understand that COVID-19 has brought all sorts of stress to our families. What's it like on the other side? And that's what we're going to be talking about. And what you might need to know as a community member in your own family, if you are dealing with stressors on your family life. Is this normal? Is everybody feeling it? Do you want to know if what you need to know? I could hardly think of a better person than Dr. Twerski. Welcome, and tell us, what's the new normal like? What was the old normal like?
Something when there was a line that my father used many, many times and he was asked about off the derech kids, and he said, off the derech, what's on the derech? What's that derech? And we're asking the same thing over here. What's normal? And it's really difficult to nail that. What does normal mean? There's no two couples whose marriage is identical. It can't be. The actual bond of marriage is with two completely different people. So that by basic definition, marriage is a hybrid. It's a new entity that's formed out of two very, very different people. You can't marry your sister, so you're going to have different backgrounds in terms of different sets of parents. Even if you marry somebody within the family, you're still bound to have significant differences. And the secret to marriage is, how do you deal with differences? Somebody says, well, if they both belong to the same community, the same kehillah, it's better. I grant you that having things in common with your spouse your spouse to be would be a wonderful thing. But think of it for a second. If two people, you want to talk a shidduch between a guy here and a girl over there, and you discover that both of them enjoy the same kind of entertainment, or they both like the same flavor ice cream, that doesn't make a marriage. The marriage is sooner based on the fact that they have differences between them, and that they develop ways of how to deal with that. A sore spot with me is that my observation over many years is that the majority of divorces that take place, or I should expand that, not just to divorces, but marriages that get into trouble, are marriages that have not been properly prepared for. And that the preparation for marriage begins with role models for parents, which not everybody has, Um, I have a couple that I'm working with now that both of them come from horrific backgrounds. Um, with one with divorced parents, one was widowed. The bottom line is neither of them were raised in a normal household, and there was enough issues and mental illness and things of that sort that were happening there, so that it made life for them very, very difficult. Growing up, what kind of model did they have for what marriage is supposed to look like? So really the greatest input would come from one's family background. One would also hope that in our school system, we prepare our Talmidim and Talmidais with the proper set of interpersonal skills, as we call Musar, right? But I mean applied Musar. I don't mean the kind of mostly academic. And they have that to supplement. There's another thing that before marriage, the Chassanim and Kalas each meet with their respective teachers, guides, whatever we want to call them, and they do another job in terms of preparing. Now, what's sad is that one would hope that if somebody's lacking in terms of a family background, they could compensate with either of the other two resources, and that doesn't happen well. So they end up with couples that are without the basic skills for how to manage marriage.
I've been begging, screaming and hollering for the longest time that we're not that we should be doing much more in terms of preparation. Preparing our couples, that they should have premarital counseling, not necessarily in halachas and with the Chassanim teachers and the Kala teachers, but just living life, budgeting. I think you even spoke for a talk that I did, a series that I did a long time ago on that. We had a guy, there was like a 10-hour thing I put together on financing, how to make a budget, insurances, all of the things that, how are they supposed to know? I'm doing a talk on adolescence now, and I did I mentioned there about you tell children to speak respectfully when they disagree with you. So have you taught them how to do it? Like Ma'ichatei said, why would you think a kid would have the skills to know how to dissent? I really think it's something that we should be talking about. I assume, is it fair to say that this is a gap that's missing, something that should be there?
It's a serious gap. And while I would have to give credit that in the bigger picture, Chosn and Kala teachers are doing a better job today than they were doing perhaps 20, 30 years ago. It is serious, it's still seriously deficient. Yes, there are some really good ones out there. There's many different complicating factors. One of the factors is that they can be giving very different information to the Chosn and to the Kala. And one of the ways of bypassing that chasm is if you put the Chosn and Kala teachers in contact with each other. So far, from all of my children that were married, only one of my mechatonim sent me an email saying, "Please provide me with the name and phone number of the Kala teacher."
They could communicate.
One time. Only once.
Maybe 5 kids worth of somebody. Somebody trying to find. I didn't think of that one. So let me ask you. On top of everything, when we spoke a few weeks ago talking about the topic, I remember you telling me that the young couples that enter, that started their marriage with all of this chaos of COVID going on, were under many, many times more stress than any couple goes to. I believe you said then they normally go their own way after Sheva Brachos and they go back to to living life. School, yeshiva, kollel, whatever they're doing. So what does it look like in the real world? What does it look like? What did it look like, especially in those those stressful, I think in the New York area, certainly those 3, 4, 5 weeks when it was just people were afraid to walk out the door. So what did it look like, and what issues have you seen, and what do parents need to know? Either parents like us, meaning to help our own family, our own married children, or the couples themselves.
Actually, there's several different areas, and I'm just going to go back to the my personal experience. I was laid up for 2 weeks. My wife was laid up the exact same time that I was, so we were just,
COVID?
We had COVID. This was I got out of bed the Sunday before Pesach, so I was literally flat out for 2 weeks. Baruch Hashem, one of my kids at home was very good in terms of making sure that we nibbled a little bit of food and we had a little thing, something to drink. I personally made it my business to get up and walk back and forth in my bedroom. It wasn't easy, and it's not a huge room, but I just felt that the movement is going to make a difference. And later on, some of the researchers claimed that one of the things that was a positive factor is movement. The experience, there were several stressful areas, and one of the stressful areas was where there was a
Go ahead. Oh God. Go ahead, please. Just 1 second, please. Please forgive me, folks. 1 second, please. Okay, I think we're clear. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, Rabbi Say. Okay, go.
I figured out what to do there.
What?
I've held a couple of Zoom meetings before, so I figured out how to handle that. Among the stressors that were active at the time, one, and I'm gonna make an assumption. It may not be a fair assumption, but I think that our community may be a tad more stuck in this than other communities, and it's probably for positive reasons, even though it's a negative thing. I was on the receiving end of virtually dozens and dozens and dozens of phone calls, most of them coming from my children, others coming from other family members. You got to go to a doctor, and your kidneys are failing, and your lungs are this, and and even though you're not coughing, and Baruch Hashem, we had that oxygen meter that Baruch Hashem, I was in the upper 90s all the time. I did not have, Baruch Hashem, any breathing issues. Every other body function, other than the fact that I was extremely weak, all other body functions were functioning. I just had no energy to do anything, no appetite to eat. So with all of these stressors, there were some social stressors that came into play. Now there's another one. I actually heard a Dayan really attack this one tendency. Our news media were reporting tragedy after tragedy. So we heard about this one dying and that one dying, and how many cases were here and how many cases were there, and the shortage of ventilators, and and all of these different. And then, of course, if you're really that bored, you can watch the daily updates coming from the White House and from Albany or wherever else. But the news was loaded with tragedy. And unfortunately, I don't know anybody who didn't know somebody personally who was a victim. We have in the show next door over here, there's a sign that has pictures of 11 people who are misfollowing here, and it's not even the full tally of how many victims that we knew from the Beth Medrash here. So we were inundated with negativity.
And just a second, Rabbi, are you suggesting that that shouldn't have been the case? Are you suggesting that we should not have publicized this or known about it?
There was a lot. There were things that needed to be publicized. There were things that may not have been necessary. And I'm not telling you. I don't tell the media what they should cover, what they shouldn't cover.
You're talking about our kehillas. I mean, our
kehillas. It may have been a smarter thing to not have been up to date on those kinds of media.
Rabbi, you spoke about spouses being different from each other, right? And
right.
That's the way of the world. I find that most educationally, in terms of personality profiles and learning profiles, I find that it's almost the vast majority are opposites, are polar opposites, in fact. I mean, or if not polar opposites, certainly very different from each other. My wife and I, she just refused to be involved. She just took herself off the grid. She said it's too much stress, and she took us off. And she asked all of our children. She took us off all family chats that were posting up stuff. And she said, and she told everybody, she told all her friends, if you send me stuff, I'm removing you. Just knock it off. I don't want to know about it. I know what I need to know. I know that I need to be safe, and that's it. And I don't know. I in some ways I felt I don't know, comfortable and more. I felt better knowing what's going on. I think it's a personality. It's a
personality thing, and it's probably not gender specific either.
No, it's not gender specific. Absolutely not. For sure not.
Just different people like different things.
Right.
And I mean, there are times when I don't pay attention to the media at all. Not that I won't peruse it once or twice a day, but I don't really sit around on it.
Right.
And my wife will, you know what? Your phone works better than mine. Can I borrow your phone? And by the way, my phone is passworded, and she knows the password. That's a very, very safe thing. It's an Eitz Tova.
Absolutely.
Don't keep secrets from your spouse.
We have the same password.
Right. So without
now a 3-year-old grandson knows it already,
Right. Right. So there's nothing to there's not a secret that I keep from her. Baruch Hashem, she works in an office where there's confidential information, and in my office is obviously confidential information. And outside of that, we share everything. The things that are in confidence.
Here, yep.
We both behave, and we don't share that. But again, to go back to what we were talking about, the secret in managing marriage, and this is for all of mankind, and from the beginning of time, is that you have to be able to have a system by which you deal with your differences. Accept the differences. You don't have to be identical. I'm not going to be my wife. My wife's not going to be me. We don't have to like the same foods. We don't have to enjoy the same entertainment. But we do have to make a place where each of us is able to be accepting, tolerant, and supportive of the other one. So that my first venture into devices was a Palm Pilot that I sort of inherited. And the Palm Pilot turned out for me to be a terrific thing, because it was not, my wife needs the lights off at night, and I need the lights on at night because I like to read. Well, this gave me an opportunity to read without bothering her, right? And this was, I found a way of being respectful of the boundaries that she has and of the needs that she has, even though I don't share them. And it's a critical thing because we're not always going to want the same things. And how are we going to manage that? I
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I am supposed to be driving up to the country this coming weekend. Now, Rabbi Yankee, you know that I'm an out-of-towner. The appreciation that I have for the Catskills is zero. I would have no problem giving it back to the Indians, and I would miss it for a moment. My mother-in-law has a place out there in one of the very nice colonies in South Fallsburg. Decent place. The Beis Medrash there is wonderful. The island that's there is wonderful. I don't have a painful time being there. It's not. It's just a pain in the neck driving back and forth. But somebody has to be with my mother-in-law for Shabbos, and it sort of falls on my responsibility, and I got to do it. And I make it. I make it work. I would much rather have my own bed, my own kitchen, my own table, my own couch, my own everything, you know. But at the same time, my wife wants to do this for her mother. Her mother deserves it. So we do it. Do I have a great time there? No, I don't have a bad time. It's Shabbos. Shabbos is Shabbos, you know. We're always required to figure out what it is in life that we can do to accommodate the other one, to make their lives more comfortable.
What you were saying is that the couples that were thrown together under COVID and were together 24/7 for weeks on end or months, that in many cases that added a great deal of stress. So how are couples dealing with it? And what did that stress look like? What was it? What did it look like when you have two different people who haven't, who got married? And usually this, I guess you would say that this getting to know you period in any marriage, extended over a period of time. Now it got telescoped into, they got 5 years of getting to know each other in a month. They were together all the time. What did it look like? What were they presenting, and how do you help them through it? That's my question.
There's a wealth of quarantine humor out there, a wealth of it, right? Now, I don't go searching the stuff, but people send me things, and somebody sent me this description of a husband who was quarantined. He says, my wife and I both work, and we work very long hours, and actually talked to her for over an hour. She's a really nice person. I discovered that she works in the medical field. We might actually enjoy spending time together. There's an old little tool that I use in sessions often, especially when people have to talk about change. Because what stress really is the challenge of adapting to change. We like routine. Now, routine has the feature that it's boring also. But one of the things that I will ask my clients to do sitting in the office is, okay, fold your arms. So, can you fold your arms? Can you fold your arms? Okay. They fold their arms. I said, look, are you sure this has no clinical significance whatsoever? But take a look which hand is on top and which is on the bottom. Okay, make that observation. Now, reverse it. And everybody fumbles around. It's completely awkward to try to reverse it, right? When they get it, they're not comfortable. And if we divert the attention away from how they're holding their hands backwards, right? And we start talking about whatever. We can talk about Trump. We can talk about the UN. We can talk about sports. They're going to either unclasp their arms or they're going to switch back, right? Why? Because we're creatures of habit. So the first major form of stress is where you're forced, you're compelled by circumstances to now adapt to a new reality. Now, some of that, thank God the seasons change sort of gradually, right? But the Gemara even tells us that when you have these really dramatic changes in weather, these kinds of of sudden changes produce illness, right? Now, not exactly, medically what highly is referring to. Is it referring to backaches and headaches? Is it referring to, fever and sore throats? I'm not sure. But the point of it is that we regulate ourselves. Routine makes that much easier for us. And then from time to time, something comes and forces a change in that. Couples need to have together time. It's very meaningful to have together time, obviously. Couples each need to have alone time. And the alone time is for each of them just to get their own bearings for themselves, who they are and what they are. Being thrown together 24 hours a day, it's not going to be terrible for everybody, but we're all going to wind up missing that alone time. So that if you want to describe how a couple can manage their experience of being together in a little bit more of a healthy way, they should become attuned to how does my spouse use his or her time? How much of it are they looking to be sitting next to me and always together? How much of it do they use for outside social connections, right? And how much do they do by themselves where they isolate? And I don't mean this in a pathological term of some defense mechanism, but people do take time for themselves. So that I pick up my wife from work, we come home, we can actually spend a couple of hours together before I go back to the office. It's not unheard of that we'll spend time sitting at the table together eating. It's not unheard of that we'll spend some time sitting on the couch talking. And sometimes I'll be here and she'll be there. And we're perfectly okay with it because we each want some of this time. For those people, men or women, who are much more tuned into their social needs being met by people outside of their home and the family, this quarantine, this period of the last couple of months was a huge hit. And they were, it's probably different today than it would have been a couple of decades ago when we didn't have the same access to communication. I went for 2 months without seeing any of my children, but they were constantly on the phone. Not only that, many of them were doing video calls.
I think, by the way, that this whole Zoom and all of that is, I wouldn't say refuah before the makkah, the healing before the illness, but it certainly has made things a lot more manageable for people in terms of running their professional lives and their personal lives, for sure. I mean, I certainly felt
absolutely
that, and I don't think we'll go back to the way we were completely ever, to some degree. I mean,
listen, all of technology does not allow us to go back to where things were. We even had with my father. He's on the other side of the world. We had Zoom meetings where the entire family was hooked up, and we were there. There was a couple of them who don't have devices with video capability. They were on the phone, so they were audio, not video, but everybody was part of it. It was now. There is a sense in which some of the communication that we have that's digital is not 100% real communication. That's another huge topic that we might spend some time discussing at another time, about social media and how it's not as real as we would want. It does not truly meet our needs for socialization. That's another whole discussion. But the point is that being alone with somebody, if you enjoy their presence, it's a good experience. Now, in that good experience, you have to have ways of navigating. You know, we don't do this 24 hours a day in our regular lives. We go out to work, we come home, we go out to shopping, we come home. There are things we do together, things we don't do together. So we have time where we're able to sort of regroup ourselves. The challenge is now we don't have that. Now we have to constantly face this. And there's a set of skills that goes into that. Learning how to communicate, learning how to be respectful. There was somebody who had a very interesting portrayal of this, where they built in for themselves a period of time every day, 20 minutes, right? In usually clips of 10 minutes each. And what they did was they referred to this not as our time or family time, but as you and me time. And how they would utilize the time would be to spend 10 minutes where one person talks, and they're talking completely about themselves, about their own experience. They stay away from making any confrontational statements, accusations, challenging complaints. They speak specifically about themselves. They're making I statements. This is a common tool in communication. When they finish, the other one, the spouse, can join the conversation in terms of give and take, but they're never responding. What they're doing is they're clarifying. So I heard you say such and such. I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean this and this and this, right?
The other one doesn't go to the I statements themselves about themselves, but rather finds out what the other one was saying.
Because what they're really doing at that point is listening. It's called reflective listening. Probably one of the best books in the field is written by a colleague of ours, Dr. Meir Wickler. Probably one of the best books in the Goyish world. In the secular world, there is not a book of that caliber. And I know that it's been through many, many reprints over the years. The last time I met him in the street, it was beyond 17. So it's an excellent resource, and it's an ArtScroll publication.
What's the book called?
10 Minutes a Day to a Better Marriage.
Okay.
Excellent book. But he has chapters that talk about the specific issues with anger and jealousy and this and that. But the pillar of it is that when we communicate, we need to be able to have our message getting through clearly, that my intended message reaches you and your intended message reaches me. And I'm going to venture to say that we probably have not enjoyed a perfect communicator since Ronald Reagan left office. So if my expressive communication is going to be less than 100%, I would hope that your receptive communication is good enough that you can figure out the message that I really mean to say. And you can find this out in multiple ways. For example, I may come home tonight and my wife will be in the kitchen and I'll go directly to the refrigerator and open it up. Now, it would be very reasonable for her to say, "Oh, are you hungry? Do you want something to eat?" That's a very reasonable conclusion to reach. That's what the intended message is. It may very well be that I'm opening it because I plan to go to the grocery tomorrow morning early, and I just want to know, do we need milk? Do we need eggs? Or whatever? And I'm going to check to see if we're low, and that's going to be on my shopping list. So there are alternative messages that can be there. You can always bet the odds, but if you're going to bet the odds, you're going to be wrong some of the time. So that what we ultimately need to learn how to do is communicate our messages better, interpret the messages better, and clarify. If you're not sure and it really matters, you really need to understand what does the other one mean. And it's okay for you to ask, do you mean such and such? Now, I'm already of the age when my hearing is not as good as it was when I was younger. And there are times in which my wife will say something to me. Yes, my wife will say something to me. And she's not right near me. She's like in the other side of the room, or she's around the corner in the kitchen or something. And I may not hear well what she said. And we can have some very, very amusing interactions when we realize that I'm hearing one thing and that's not what she said. And we can all come up with experiences that we've had where there was a miscommunication that was responsible for the fact that some message did not get through. All of this are, just the fact that let's give this a number. 5% of all communication is not going to work. Okay, so if we're batting 95%, we're doing pretty well. So 5% is not going to work. But 5%, when we're each going about our daily business, we're going to work, we're going to here, we're going to I go to Shachris, I go to Mincha. We have our schedules so that the 5% that we're not going to communicate well is not really all that much. Now that we're thrown 24/7 into the same room, right? That 5% it's still going to be 5%, right? But it's going to, but it's going to give you many more potentials for conflict, and conflict resolution, and these kinds of things are not taught before marriage. There's another angle on this, and for years when I would pick up all the Judaica books about marriage, and I mean I can rattle off some titles, and hopefully I'm getting most of them right, but they were really all very mushy. There's a neshama, and it goes into two different people, and you're only a half of a neshama until you find your zivug, and the bas kol, and bas pliny, and it's basher, and it's all mushy. And I used to look at this and saying, can you tell me, give me some skills as to how to manage this? And I was looking at these books that were otherwise wonderful books. Many of them had haskamas that were extremely respectable. I'm looking at this and saying, what's all this mushy stuff about? I know all that. I heard about it when I was 4 years old. I know it. Let's move on. Now tell me some skills. When my wife wants to argue with me, how do I answer her? And I would tell you that while those are not necessarily, these are good books to get background from. It's not bibliotherapy, the use of reading as a form of therapy. What's valuable about these books is that it's pointing to something that we really need to see this as a pillar of a relationship. And that is that a husband or wife needs to look at their other half as their other half, that their shleimus is achieved by being together with that person. And that I can disagree with my wife from now till the cows come home, but there is no other member of the human race that is going to be as precious to me and as necessary to me as my spouse. Why? HaKadosh Baruch Hu did that. He put us together. This is how it is. Now, once I am accepting that as the context, right? And I am saying, okay, we are never going to part ways. We are in this till 120, right? Well, I'm 3 years older than her, 123. Right? If we're in this for keeps, right? I have now an additional motivation to make this thing work. I've got to make this into something that I'm going to be happy with, so that the challenge here is I can sit back and say, you know what, I need to have this my way, da, 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 da. And a major issue that drives couples apart is my way. Everybody has to win. Uh, I have to. I have to repeat a situation. It was quite a number of years ago, where I had a couple here, a wonderful, two wonderful people. They were B'nai Torah. They came from families of B'nai Torah. 2 shiurim a day. The wife was. This is before there was things online. There were Torah tapes, and the wife was always listening to the Torah tapes. And after several sessions, it was very clear that the communication was troubled. But one of the things that they came up with was that, are you ready for this one? He's the Yankees fan and she's a Mets fan.
And that's a problem.
And that was one of their issues. And I'm listening to this.
By the way, may I interrupt for a moment? Are you finding that that the current political situation, this very stressful, polarized world in which we live in terms of political life in the White House and and all of that, are you finding that that's put stresses on marriage?
It's putting stresses on marriage, but not because we're talking about the Republicans against the Democrats. What we're talking about is, I am happy with the way it's being handled. Not happy with the way it's being handled. I wish it were better. The focusing on what's positive as to what's missing.
No, I'm saying
those kinds of differences.
If people find, look, I'm very opinionated about this thing, and I haven't lost any friendships over it, but it's certainly grating to me, and I'm curious. I'm curious if you're finding in your practice. I'm not speaking about just schmoozing, that this really becomes an issue.
I have not had couples here that have differences in politics. Years ago, yes.
Population around Thanksgiving time, you see these articles. What do you do with Uncle Joe who comes in,
right.
either MAGA hat or lehefa, the other way around.
Right.
Sometimes people just say, listen, let's not discuss this. But I'm just curious. So you say you haven't found this in.
I haven't found that. I've been party to countless conversations that get into the political realm. I walk away from most of them because they're just not productive. I find them.
I posted originally. I posted quite a bit on social media, and then ultimately, I came to understand that the way it is now, I don't think it's ever been this much, but people are basically set with what they are. That needle hardly moves. People who feel a certain way, and you just have to respectfully, agree to disagree. What you said about personalities was very, very interesting to me, especially as an educator, much of what I do is a problem solve. I'm doing a series, I said, on teenagers, session number 6. We're doing number 4 tomorrow on technology. Session number 6, I'm calling it the answer key. And that means how to figure out why the wheels are coming off if you don't know. Sometimes it's very obvious. You deal with someone who has an addiction or somebody else. But, sometimes it's trauma. But so I try to help families find the answer key. And one of the things, this whole personality profile and the way people think differently, and especially in terms of learning, it's something that I'm very, very attuned to. We're doing our Gemara books now. I just sent the Yishal Amidas book to print it today, Baruch Hashem. But so I think I absolutely believe this with every fiber in my body, that adolescence, raising adolescent children, um, is part of Hashem's Musa Seder for us. I mamish believe it. In other words, we're born selfish, and that's just the way we are. We're born. We're thinking about ourselves all the time, and then you start dealing with your friends and friendships, and then the first real relationship that you have to make work besides your initial family is marriage, right? And I think we marry people opposite many times, because that teaches us about, it teaches us about how to deal with, how to put someone else's feelings before your own, and how to deal with somebody that you just don't understand, that you can't figure out. So I think that raising adolescents and married kids especially teaches you how to parse your words and how to not say everything that's on your mind. And if you're unloading with a 10-year-old every time you have something to say, Dr. Twerski better than anyone, that ends very quickly, and usually not very pleasantly. So I think this is all part of Hashem's plan to make us better people. I have a word on Eza Kenegdai, right? According to the personality profiles, Rashi says that Hashem said, when Hashem created Chavas, he says, I made you an Ezer Kenegdai. So Rashi says, if you're Zoiche, if a person, right, if he merits, if he prays well, if he's a meritorious person, so he gets an Ezer, a helper, or it's Kenegdai, it's opposite. It's either one or the other. It can't be both. Ezer means, what was Rashi thinking? It seems that a co-pilot sits next to you, right? Kenegda, opposite you, means you're butting heads. So Rashi says it's one or the other. I'd like to humbly suggest that perhaps if you accept the notion that different personalities complement each other, actually, then an Eza Kenegda is somebody that your husband or wife have a personality that's different than yours, so that you learn to appreciate how that half lives also in a way that you didn't before. So I want to suggest perhaps that an Ezer is a Kenegda. My wife's person, when we started Project Yes, we had a list, you remember, we had a list of 130 kids who were in no yeshiva setting at all.
Right.
And I went to the Metzis Gedolei, I went to Rabbi Zatzal, and I said, like, what do we do? These kids, the average kid was between 4 and 7 yeshivas, that they were sent out of already. So we decided, I said, I think we should get them we should get them, the 8th yeshiva is not going to be any different than the first 7. So why don't we get them let's get them mentors and work. They should learn for an hour a night and stay in the community. That was the big idea. So somebody asked me if I personality profiled the kids. This was 1997. Said that maybe that would help them in their work. So I said, well, come on, I'm a skeptic. So he sat me down in front of a computer. I said, let me try it. So I took some questions, and it said that I should be a high school teacher or a guidance counselor. And I said, wow. This is before, the internet was so keyed in. So like this personality profile thing, I think, is a very, very big deal. And it would make sense then that being thrown with somebody without the norm, with such a different personality than your own, and like you said, it's not gender specific, we're just different. I think without the normal learning curve that you get to do this over a long period of time, being thrown together and being forced to go through this, it's too much too fast, I believe. I certainly could see how that would be an issue. I mean, Baruch Hashem, I kept telling Udi, my wife Udi, and saying, Baruch Hashem, we're most serene when we're together alone. Baruch Hashem, it's a big schus. I don't take it for granted. I thank Hashem for it every day. But, I certainly see at our age folks who are having a very hard time. If their relationship was not, unfortunately, they were just plodding along, it became very stressful. I know it's been young couples, but I know couples our age, many people have come, to talk it over, and look, I think we need to be honest about it and try to deal with it as best we can.
You know, if you speak to Dayanim who are involved with Bate Din that do Gittin, they will tell you maybe it's not as common as apple pie and Chevrolet, but it is not a rare occurrence for a couple to walk in to the Beis Din and say, "Be Mesader get for us." Now, our youngest child's Sheva Brachos finished yesterday.
Absolutely, right. And go ahead.
And they were basically treading water over an extended period of time.
And I said, I want to tell you, just maybe I shouldn't say this on the air, but you know, my wife and I, Udi and I, were in a social setting, and someone our age had gotten divorced after the last child got married, and another person was saying something critical about. I said, maybe you should stand up for them. Maybe you should stand up for them out of respect that it wasn't. As I said, who am I to judge a person that's not happy like that, you know? But maybe they just did right by their children, and now they, you know, an actuary would say that a 60-year-old has 25, 30 years to go, and an average. So they say, listen, I don't want to do this anymore. What is it? I'm not encouraging it, certainly, but
I've participated in probably many hundreds of conversations about, you know, the rising divorce rate and this and that. And it's a common discussion both among professionals as well as in the lay public. And one of the things that stands out in all these conversations is that people walk in with these opinions that are extremely general. Now, my father, Zanga Stark, says that Moshe Rabbeinu stopped at 10. He stopped, the Aseret Sedibus at 10.
He stopped at 10.
Number 11 would have read, "Thou shalt not generalize." And what it boils down to is that people, when they get into these conversations, oh, you know why there's so many divorces? It's because the men are tightwads and the finances and they're not faithful. And then get in the same crowd, no, it's the women and they're this and they're denying the visitation and they're demanding money and you listen to all this, and the reality is that I really don't know whether there's any meaningful statistics over here. I don't quite care. Because the reality is that I'm not going to try to use statistics to predict the couple in front of me what they're up to. There's certain things you paskin with not this one. You know, you don't use statistics on a patient that comes to the doctor's office. You have to evaluate the patient themselves. And you know what? Hey, what are the statistics about the domestic violence? Real close to 50-50. Who's the perpetrator and who's the victim? Really close to 50-50. You can't hear that there's an abusive marriage and assume that the husband is the one who's being abusive to the wife. So again, the numbers are really not informative. And what we ultimately have to have is that we zero in, where is this couple up to? What is going on between them? What has dysregulated their relationship? Or what is the fundamental flaw in their relationship? I have heard couples that never, ever bonded. I had a couple sitting here some time ago. And, you know, just to be respectful, I asked the husband, okay, why are you here? And I get this, we're having difficulty with communication. I said, how long are you married? 9 years. And how long is this problem going on? About 6 weeks. Okay. That was interesting to me. But in the meantime, I looked at the wife, and she's sitting there going like this.
She's going like this. 8 days, right?
Nine. Apparently, during Sheva Brachos, she said something to him, And instead of responding to her and correcting her, because she was guessing at some information, instead of just correcting her, saying, no, it wasn't like that, it was like this. Instead of doing that, he snapped at her and says, are you stupid or something? During Shabbat, come on, give me a break, And she says, since that time, I could never feel comfortable with him. And you know what? It isn't even such a terrible thing that we would think of. But when you do this to a marriage that's just mamish taking its first steps, now back to the point that I was making. If we address the fact that we are bonded with our spouse, only one, plural of spouses, spice, right? If we're connected to them, and that connection is a neshamadika connection, and we're recognizing that that's how deep it goes, right? We approach it differently. One of the couples that I'm working with right now, I like to tell them, put away some of the negativity that's been going on between you. Now, we very often sit back and say, well, so I say, tight. Let's first get them to stop snapping at each other and doing negative things. And then we're going to get them to start doing positive things together. And I have to tell you, while logic may dictate that, emotion doesn't function that way. And it functions a different set of rules. And if I could get the couple to make gestures towards each other of a positive nature, make your husband or your wife a cup of coffee every day, offer to take them for a walk, do something. There's a famous story. I've seen this Maisa from various tzaddikim. There's some said of Shalom Kamikin did this, some say Avtolio Ravshitz did it, whatever. The Rabbi had one of his kehillah was a wealthy man, but he never gave a dime for anything. You couldn't tap this guy for tzedakah for nothing. And one day this man comes into the Rebbe and he says, Rebbe, I need a favor. Okay, what is that? He says, I hate my wife. I want the Rebbe should daven that she should die. So the tzaddik looks at him and says, that's not part of my job description. I daven that people should be barach yomim, right? So he says, Rebbe, I'm a wealthy guy, and I will put down as much money as you ask me to, right? I have to get rid of her. So he says, you know what? I have an idea. He says, the Gemara says, for the sin of violating vows and promises, a person's wife dies. He says, here's the deal. He says, our town needs a new mikveh. And I was going to be making an appeal in Beis Medrash this Shabbos to raise the money. He says, I'm going to do that. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to, call out that you're going to undertake the entire expense. He says, somewhere early in the week, Sunday, Monday, the Askanim in town are going to come for a down payment. And you say, you know what? I changed my mind. And then you laugh all the way to the bank. So the guy says he's thrilled with himself. He goes home. He's smiling ear to ear. Comes Shabbos, and sure enough, the Rebbe gets up and he says, our mikveh is dilapidated, it's falling apart. We need to build a new mikveh. It's going to cost, a nice chunk of money. Can we start getting some donations? And this guy jumps up and says, I'm undertaking the entire thing. And everybody's like in awe. They never saw this happen. This guy he never gave a penny for anything. And fine. The murmurings in town, by Motzei Shabbos, everybody had heard about this. And Sunday, Monday, they came for a down payment, and he says, change my mind. And of course, the Tom is buzzing. He said it, changed his mind. This guy doesn't care. He got what he wanted. 2 weeks later, he comes into the Rebbe and he says, Rebbe, she's fine. She's healthy as a horse. She's going shopping. She's going with her friends. It's not working. And he says, there's a problem. He says, when it says that it's because it's a negative consequence. For you, it's not a negative consequence. Right? So he says, so Rebbe, what do I do now? I have an idea. He says, do you have some cash in your pocket? He says, yeah. He says, okay, on the way home, I want you to go buy your wife a piece of jewelry and give it to her. He says, I'm going to get you guys to fall in love again. And he buys her a piece of jewelry, and she makes his favorite dinner, and there's a couple of days of that, then they go on vacation for a couple of weeks, and they fall back in love. And then he comes back, and she gets sick, and he comes into the Rabbi and says, now that we fell in love, okay, pay up. Pay up.
On that note, we're out of time. That's
It
great.
would be wonderful if we could tell people to do that. But the reality is, if we build positive behaviors into the context of how we live, the negatives become much easier to handle.
I think the message really for young couples really is that to really invest in the marriage. It doesn't come. It doesn't come by itself. It's hard work. Your father, Zangazan, told me, who was also kind enough to mentor me and he gave me so much time. So I called him once and asked him, I assume you've heard this from him more than once. I said, I'd like to start writing. Do you have any suggestions? I wrote a few articles then in the Jewish Observer, and I was starting to enjoy it. I said, I'd like to write. So he says, Rabbi Yakov, get used to rejection. Is that correct? His first manuscript, I think he said 37?
Yes.
What?
His first manuscript was rejected by dozens of publishers.
I think I remember 37. It was 25 years ago, but I think it was 30. He said, Rabbi Yakov, his tone of voice, Rabbi Yakov, get used to rejection. And he said, my takeaway from that was that you see this successful person who wrote 80 books and whatever it was, this 120. You see an accomplished person, and you don't realize that they also went through, times and challenges, and he wasn't born, writing books with Schultz and all of that.
Right.
I think marriage. That's probably a message that we should be giving to I did, by the way, children and grandchildren, and especially as they get closer to marriage and start relationships. Is that you have to work at it. A good marriage doesn't come by itself. And it's something that, it's the most important investment that they'll ever make in their personal life. I've been seeing we got to do this again. It was nice. It was really nice.
Yes, Hashem.
Hashem should really give you continued success in your work. I did not know about the COVID, so I'm a little late wishing you refuah shlema.
I'm running around perfectly normal.
You sound great. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you found this helpful and thought-provoking. We should continue to work together for good things. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you. It's wonderful spending the time with you.
Always. Be well.